What? Yeah, it's recording. Oh, okay. Let me also reintroduce myself. Hi, I'm a junior at the Illinois Math and Science Academy. My name's Ibrahim Ba, and I'm the current personal relations head of SBSSE and the future president of SBSSE.
Really happy to hear that title. So, introducing myself, I'm Brandon Rogers. I'm a senior, uh, really getting close to the end of the year, so it's hard to say those words, but I'm the current president of SBSSC, and for one, I'm incredibly excited to see Ibrahim take over in my role, and also incredibly excited to be speaking here today with you, Dr. Brown.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
So, Ibrahim, would you like to start us off with that first question, if you're ready to get going?
Okay. Dr. Brown, what are your preferred research interests? Like, what have you been researching lately?
Great question. So I just published a book called The Residential is Racial, A Perceptual History of Homeownership, which tries to think about the ways that things like policies like redlining and residential segregation have changed the ways that people have thought about race, what it is, how to read it, and how to measure it. So I'm looking at um, I'm an English I mostly work in literature, so I'm looking at a lot of literature, but also history, architecture, to think about the ways that the definition of race was really changed by the different ways that people were investing in home ownership in the 20th century.
Oh, that's an incredibly interesting topic. Um, I know that we have a class here at IMSA called American Studies, and only recently has the curriculum touched on processes like redlining in American cities. So it's really uh, good to hear that there's a book out there for our listeners and us to read because we're both very interested in that topic. What was the book's name again?
It's called The Residential is Racial, A Perceptual History of Mass Homeownership.
Very cool. In your research, in your findings, you mentioned architecture. Is there anything that you have found interesting in the intersection between architecture and race? Um, what interesting results have come out of your work so far?
Sure. I mean, that's a lot of what my work has done. Before this, I wrote a book called The Black Skyscraper, A Perceptual History of Architecture, which is thinking about the ways the emergence of the early skyscraper quite literally shaped and reshaped the ways that people could see race, saw bodies from the top of the skyscraper where everyone looks like kind of ants or specks at the bottom, to all these different vantage points that the skyscraper was bringing into the city. So my work is really interested in asking questions about how architecture is always shaping the ways that we understand and literally kind of live and experience the realities of racialization.
Wow. I personally, I live in Chicago, and now I'm going to be looking at that skyline a whole lot more different. Thank you.
What are one of the ways you go about getting this research?
Great question. I am trained as a lit scholar primarily, but also worked a lot in American studies, which is, as you know, from your course, a pretty interdisciplinary field. So I usually, well, it's a good question. I start, since I'm a close reader and I look at a lot of texts, I usually just start with the texts themselves, looking at the ways that writers and thinkers, both fiction writers, but journalists, architects, lots of people who are writing, who aren't just fiction writers, are writing about their experiences of the built environment, um, and understanding through their writing the ways that they are describing how they are thinking and literally seeing race. And so those accounts are really helpful because we often naturalize. No one teaches you how to quote unquote see race, right? No one,
Right.
no one's parents say that's how you see someone and know that they're black, and that's how you see someone and know that they're. These are processes that you just get socialized into.
Mhm.
And I use writing to try to slow down and understand those processes based on the ways that people are describing those experiences. And so close reading is probably the method in which I bring to research. But the things that I look at are really widespread: books, archives, like I just mentioned, architectural writing, redlining maps, whatever I think is going to be useful in terms of helping me understand the questions that I'm looking to answer.
Very, very, very interesting avenue of research. Um, Me and Ibrahim are huge, huge book nerds. So you mentioned how you use firsthand accounts and authors to understand how people have started to view the intersection between where we live and how we view race. Have there been any authors in particular that you have turned to frequently in your research? Any particular artistic movements that have proven a fruitful place to understand the topic of your studies?
Yeah, great questions. I also work in Chicago and lived here for some time, and so writers in Chicago are of great interest to me. So one person who comes up time and time again in the research and the teaching that I do is Gwendolyn Brooks, who hopefully you've read,
Yep.
who good, um, who I think is just such a great uh, writer in terms of capturing experience. She's obviously a fantastic poet, prize-winning poet, legendary poet. Um, but in her poetry, she's so interested in how people move around space, and describing the ways that people live and thrive, and maybe not so well thrive in space. And I think of her as kind of essential to understanding urban space in the 20th century. So she's probably one of my touchstones. A writer I think about similarly is Nella Larson, who's writing a little bit before Brooks, mostly during the Harlem Renaissance, who also has this kind of uncanny sense for kind of capturing how people are moving through race, moving through space, and in a time in the 20s and the 30s when there was so much migration to the cities. There was so much angst around racial passing and status, and she's just such a great writer who's thinking about these things. So those two, I think, most come to mind. I write a bit about Lorraine Hansberry, again, another great Chicago writer, playwright, who wrote probably the most iconic play about residential discrimination, Raisin in the Sun. And I think about her work alongside what today is probably a lesser known writer, John Cheever, who was a writer most known for writing about the suburbs. So putting their work in conversation has been really interesting for me to think about race and homeownership in the mid-century. So those are some of the writers that I tend to find myself returning to again and again.
Excellent, excellent recommendations. You
Great.
won't.
I just finished reading A Raisin in the Sun last semester, and I thought it was an amazing book. Speaking of, how do you typically get it from fiction? Like, how do you analyze these times during the fiction and how the authors were thinking during them?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think the best place to start is with the work itself. Um, because the work itself, every word is a choice. And so you can learn a lot when you really slow down and pay attention to what you're seeing, what you're not seeing, what you have access to, what you don't have access to in the ways that a writer is describing something, right? So there's so much information on the page itself that you can just start there by reading kind of slowly and carefully and asking questions of the text, like why is this like this and not like this, right? Um, and then from there, reading about the writers themselves, the ways that they're explaining their own work, thinking about their own biographies and histories, and then putting those biographies and histories in context with the world in which they were living in. So it's trying to kind of connect them to this larger network of history, culture, their contemporaries as writers, their contemporaries as thinkers, the kind of literal spaces that they're responding to. So, resituating a writer within that kind of fuller network, right, can really help even further open up and open out a text.
That is incredibly, incredibly insightful. It's great to hear about the process in which you perform your studies because it really sounds like you're covering every single base possible, and it sounds like there's amazing, amazing work being done. Um, Our next question kind of relates to academia as a whole. We kind of want to know, in your experience, what has academia been like in your field, particularly, and at an institution like U Chicago?
That's a good question. It's a big question, so I'll just start to try to answer it. Academia, I mean, every school is a little bit different. Everyone's path is a little bit different, so it's a bit hard to generalize about it. But for me, I guess I would say, since I was an undergrad all the way through to now being professor, um, it's been a place for exploration, of finding ways and studying, and thinking within set disciplines, but also using tools within set disciplines to kind of explore questions that aren't just defined by one discipline. So the work that I do, for instance, I'm trained as a literature professor, but uh, my work isn't just about literature. So using those tools to kind of think broadly and follow the things that interest me. And I think um, that is one of the great gifts of being in the academy is if you're in a place that can support your work, right? Having the freedom to really explore and use whatever tools you need to answer the questions that animate you. Um, so that's one way of thinking about it. Of course, there are limitations, as there are with any kind of institution, and challenges and things to be overcome. Um, so we can talk more about that, but I mean, there is no other world outside of academia that I could be, I think, following these kinds of questions with the freedom that I have to do so.
That is great to hear. I know Ibrahim and I are both drawn to, well, the sciences, particularly, and would like to explore academia in that way. And hearing you talk about it is incredibly, incredibly inspiring because um, it just seems like that's the best avenue to answering and exploring questions that, wake you up in the morning, that get you excited.
Mhm.
Um, in your experience, you talked about challenges in academia. What, if you would be comfortable sharing, have been some roadblocks that you have faced in exploring those questions in academia as a whole and in your individualized experience?
Yeah, great question. I'm the first person in my family to go to graduate school, and get a PhD. So I kind of knew what undergrad was gonna be like. Um, and uh But when I kind of decided to go to graduate school, I had to figure a lot of that out on my own. I didn't really have a lot of mentorship or models, for how to do that. And there are like very specific genres of materials, like when you're applying to undergrad too. Like there's the personal statement, and unless you have someone who's telling you and helping you understand what that document is meant to be, it can be really intimidating. And you don't know that there's actually a kind of genre, a way of writing these things, right? No one tells you that, right? Unless you kind of seek out or have someone kind of help you figure that out. The same is true when you're applying to graduate school. So I had to kind of figure out a lot of things on my own, figure out a lot of questions on my own. Um, and that was true even when after I got into my PhD program. Again, because I didn't really have any it was I didn't know that world very well, so I kind of had to figure out how to navigate it, um uh on my not so much on my own, right, but really kind of be very proactive in asking questions and understanding my own trajectory, building relationships, seeking out people who are asking similar questions, like the ones I was interested in asking. So, I guess, yeah, so it's just, I guess, not so much challenges, but just kind of having to figure out what I didn't know and figuring out how to be resourceful in in understanding what the expectations are, what success looks like, what a good project looks like, seeking out role models and mentors to kind of help me understand those things.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mention being proactive. How would you say like how have you been proactive in your early days of research and when like you're applying to graduate school?
Yeah, I could have been more proactive. I got a little bit lucky there, I have to say. I decided to go to graduate school. I applied in my senior year of my undergraduate program, kind of late, very late. Made a decision where someone kind of reached out to me and said, a teacher of mine reached out and said, "Oh, I think you would be good at this. You should think about grad school." And I didn't even know that was a thing. So, I kind of realized that was someone said it to me, I was like, oh, let me figure out what this thing is. So I just did a lot of reading and research within a month to try to understand how to apply and what it meant, and work on an essay, and take the exams I needed to take. And so, I tend to be a kind of reserved person, so I'm not always good at asking for help. And this is what I always tell my students, like, ask questions, go talk to people, don't be afraid to ask questions. When I didn't have this in high school, when you get to college, they have these things called office hours, where um, the professors just have open office hours. You can just show up. They'll be in their office between 2 and 4 on a given day. And, I think if you're a student, it's really intimidating to just show up at an office to talk to a professor if you don't feel like you know exactly what you want to say. Um, and I wish I had been more open and more less shy, I guess, and less reserved, and just gone and talked to more faculty about my work. Not that you were asking for advice, but that's something that I wish I had done kind of more. I did as much as I could. And once I figured out, oh, these are resources that are available to everybody, let me figure out how to do this, then I started to kind of take advantage of those resources. But unless someone tells you what they are, I remember I didn't know what an office hour was, because I didn't have it in high school, so I didn't really understand the concept of it. So now in my syllabus for my students, I spell out, like, here's what office hours are, here's what they're for. You should just come by, even if you don't know what your question is. Let's have a little chat with someone. You never know where it will lead you.
That really hits close to home, since we also have office hours here at our institution. And I
You
remember
do?
being
Oh,
a
great.
sophomore.
I think high school should have them. It's a good idea.
Yeah, especially since we're like a boarding school, that it's more like a college than a high school.
Got
And
it.
it has proved incredibly helpful and necessary to go to a teacher's office, just like you said, to like ask for help sometimes, because
Mhm.
sometimes you're lost on something and you just got to build up the courage to go and ask for a bit of help from the people who
Yes,
want to help you.
absolutely.
The way I see it is that not only is a professor's job like to teach you the content, but they're also teach you the content because they enjoy the content and they want to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like, if students don't come to my office hours, I'm just kind of there. So like, it's always great when students come by, and sometimes they just want to talk about books they like, and that's great. Those are really fun conversations. So there's no like thing too small or trivial that can't really be covered in office hours. And if the professor doesn't know the answer, they'll figure out how to find it out for you, or figure out who you might want to talk to next about the things you're interested in.
It's great to hear. Um, One other thing we'd like to kind of drill you on in terms of your academic experience, at least in academia, is really how has persistence towards your goals as a academic um, informed your experience? What role has it played in continuing in this work? Um, what does persistence mean to you?
That's a great question. I think research, with any sort of research, persistence is so key, especially if you're kind of posing a genuine question, right? That doesn't have a preset answer. Or you might have a hunch about the answer, but you don't know how you're going to get to the answer. So the only way you can really get somewhere is through persistence, is trying things out. You might go down a research hole and realize it's a dead end, and then have to kind of pivot and try something else. It's very common where someone will say, oh, I think I need to understand this thing to understand this, and then spend a few days reading about that thing and realizing, oh, I actually didn't need to really know anything about that at all. And that happens all the time in research. And that's okay. That's like part of the process. It's baked into what it means to do research. Is you come up against obstacles and you have to pivot and rethink your question, fine tune it, find another way, find the right archive, or realize that the archive, there is no archive, and then figure out a different way to address the things you're interested in addressing. So I think you can't do any sustained research or academic project without persistence, because then all the questions would already be answered already. And so, yeah, I think it's really important. It's important from a research perspective. I think it's important from a personal perspective, um, in terms of people might not always understand what you're doing, might not be the right audience for the work that you're doing. And I think you have to know how to kind of take feedback from people and hear what people are saying about the work you're doing or the research you're doing, but also understand, when you need to keep moving forward, how to take in those if there are criticisms, but mostly just feedback, and incorporate it, or be able to say, that's interesting, you're reading this like this. I don't actually mean it to be read that way. Let me figure out how to make it more clear what I'm trying to do. So, it can be hard. It can be kind of crushing. No one wants to be told that the things they're doing aren't right. But I think it's learning how to kind of keep going and understand that the commitment to the question you have is more important, can get you through even when you don't believe in yourself. So there are many times where I don't feel like I'm up to the task of some big question I'm trying to think through, but what gets me through is knowing that the things I'm writing about really do matter, and someone's got to write about them, and my job is to do the best I can to do justice to those questions. And that I think can be another way of framing or figuring out how to persist in projects, even when they're proving kind of difficult.
Mm.
Okay. We were talking about research. Do you think students, and especially in the Black community, students can get involved in research at an early age?
Yeah, it's a great question. At an early age, I mean, I think it's about like when you get assignments in class, I forget. I feel like I started doing quote unquote research projects probably in middle school. Um, and really throwing yourself into them, just starting to learn it for yourself, figuring out how to answer questions and find things, even when assignments aren't that interesting. Can you find something in it to make it interesting for yourself? That is kind of the beginning before you kind of plug into a formal research project, is kind of learning how to get excited about the things that you're working on and kind of going the extra mile to think about them, learning how to use the library, learning how to properly use internet sources, because there's a lot of junk out there. So how do you actually find things that are legitimate and forward a conversation? So those are all things you can just be doing on your own, hopefully with the kind of local resources of any high school or uh, um, any kind of local library. So starting there with your own passions and working on them is a good start. I would say taking advantage of what's around you, museums, local universities, if there are summer programs. The thing about most universities is they often have all of their lectures, they often have lots of visitors coming through, and those conversations are free to attend. So like getting on listservs of local schools and institutions and museums, and if there are speakers or ideas that you want to hear more about, like showing up and going to those things. Again, they often don't cost any money, and you can learn a lot. The only investment is your time. And then I think from there, I think for the sciences, it's a little easier because there are labs you can join. I think the pipeline is a little bit more not stable but accessible because of the ways that the sciences tend to work around labs, right? So you can kind of there are lots of opportunities, I believe, for high school students to be starting to work in labs through lots of programs. The humanities is a little harder because we're not lab driven, right? It's not like I'm working with a bunch of students to forward my research. It's me doing my own research. So it's a little bit harder to plug in when you're doing that kind of work, but there are opportunities. If you're in college, there are things like Mellon Mays and Leadership Alliance, which are programs particularly for underrepresented students to help them work on research projects, to give them mentorship from faculty members. Usually these are summer programs, right, where students go and live residentially and work on a project of their own devising. But if you're a high school student interested in the humanities, I think, again, your best bet is probably just trying to know as much as you can, follow your own passions, and starting to understand what lights you up. That takes a lot of time and self-introspection and reading. And so I think that's probably my suggestions. Yeah.
Those were absolutely amazing suggestions. And in fact, we just finished up a full day conference for student research projects that me and Ibrahim were both involved in called imsa. And it was a whole day of presentations and a poster session where we presented research. And it was a really, really enriching experience. And it wouldn't have started without, like you said, exploring our own interests, using the resources that we have available to us. Not every high school has a dedicated research program where students can go out to labs, like you said, and go and explore these large scientific questions.
I know
Mhm.
me personally, I did my research at Argonne National Laboratory. That wouldn't have
Mhm.
started without me starting, like, first reaching out to people and then getting rejected. But that happens with, like, reaching out. And then you keep
Yes.
applying and keep asking out. And Brendan, where do you do yours?
I'm doing mine at Northwestern, and that only started to happen after I got rejections from almost every single school that I ended up reaching out to. And it was just through the luck of getting into one program and meeting a mentor who was willing to keep me on for the year that I got to the point where I could present today. So, like you said, it's really just about persistence in those questions
Amazing.
that you care about. And
That's
uh,
right.
we have one more question, and I think we've gotten such a great conversation with you, and we really, really, really appreciate it. But one more question, and I think we can wrap it up because we've given our listeners something really, really important to think about. And it has been great talking with you.
Great. These have been fantastic questions. You guys are great interviewers.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
thank you.
Um, in your opinion, where does the current state of like Black literature and modern contemporary Black humanities stand when it comes to your research and like what's coming out now? We have amazing poets and writers and filmmakers who are doing great, great things. Do you think that in some years, people will be doing the same work that you're doing currently on writers who did amazing things 50 or 40 years ago? Uh,
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's, as you said, there's so much great work. I mean, Kendrick Lamar has a Pulitzer Prize.
yes,
You
he
know,
He
does.
does.
so, not only is there a lot of great work, a lot of great Black cultural artistic production, but that work is being recognized and applauded, and people are getting their flowers now rather than having to wait till people are dead, right?
Mm,
So I think it's a kind of an amazing moment, both for Black culture, for Black studies, such a vibrant, rich field. People are doing so much interesting work, from the super philosophical to the quantitative. There's just so many interesting questions and ways to plug in, and methods and approaches within Black studies. It's always been a very rich field and discipline, but I feel like we're in a particularly robust moment of conversation, disagreement, productive, generative disagreement. And I think we see that within the cultural sphere too, right? That there's just, if we're thinking about Black studies globally, right? We're just talking about the writing scene, right? There's just so many great novels, plays, poems. So it's a great time. And I think, we need people to study the past, and we need people in the present to be studying the present. So I think we need more people writing about contemporary arts and culture. Especially we need people your age to kind of be the critics and the explainers for your generation's emerging art forms and artworks. Every generation has to produce the critics that can unpack that generation's contributions and predilections and just styles and forms, right? And so it's never too soon to start doing that work.
That's an incredible thing to end off on. KDOT got a Pulitzer Prize. We love to hear it. And it's going to be an incredible few years as this Black cultural scene that we are seeing develop in front of our own eyes continues to grow and change. And we get to critique and learn and talk about it because it has been an amazing, amazing ride. Growing up with so many absolutely phenomenal artists and creators in the space today. I couldn't imagine a better time to be in touch with Black culture and what we are putting out in the world. It has been an amazing conversation with you, Dr. Brown. We really, really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for making the time to talk with me.
Thank you for coming out and talking with us.
Thank you very much.
We really, really appreciate it. We don't want to keep any more of your time. This has been an amazing, amazing episode. The conversation was great. We appreciate your very long answers to our questions. It really put something out there. We got something to work with.
Good.
Thank you so, so, so much. And we wish you
My
the
pleasure.
best of luck with your research. And thank you for all of your support and well wishes for us on our end.
Thanks. And well wishes for the both of you too. Sounds like you're doing big things.
Thank you. You have a wonderful day now.
All right, you too. Take care. Bye.
Take care.